Welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I hope you're well, and I hope your studies are going well. I'm Lucy Fromowitz. I'm the Vice Provost Students. Today, the webinar is all about student organization regulations, specifically Presidential Regulation Number 4. Now, I know this may not sound exciting to some of you. It's very exciting to many of us. But why should you care? Because many of you are student leaders of these very organizations, and all of our students are a member of at least one, if not several, organizations. So today is structured around a presentation and then a Q&A period. Many of you have already sent in questions, and we'll be addressing those questions. And as well, we'll take questions from those of you who are attending today. I'd like to start with the land of Noah. As the event is virtual, and we're not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that the land acknowledgement may not be for the territory that you are currently on. We ask, if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University's campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. We begin today by acknowledging that we walk upon the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, their spirituality, their culture, and stewardship of the land. We are grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. So joining me today are two people who many of you likely already know. Ross McMillan is our Executive Director of Student Engagement, and he'll be leading the presentation. As well, we have Jer Calendumble, who will also be helping us with the Q&A. Before I turn it over to Ross, let me just go through a little bit of the agenda and what to expect. So, the session is scheduled for 60 minutes and is being recorded. It will be available for viewing at the Office of the Vice Provost Student website. Ross McMillan will be doing the initial presentation, and that'll be an overview of the background of Presidential Regulation 4, the purpose, the process, and the regulation revisions. Following the presentation, we will respond to the questions that were pre-submitted and then open it up for more. If we receive many more questions than we're able to fit in an hour, then at the website, we will put up the Q&A so people can review them. Now, a few technical details. If you prefer to listen to this in another language, please click on the interpretation button. It's on the bottom menu, and that'll allow you to listen to this in French, Spanish, or Arabic channels. Language interpreters today language interpretation is provided by our students in the Glendon College Masters of Conference Interpreting program. So thank you to Eugene and Rose May at the French booth, to Maria and Eliana in the Spanish booth, to Bon and Nadia in the Arabic booth. There will be live captions available, as well as our ASL interpreters joining us today. So with that, I turn it over to Ross.
Great, thanks, Lucy. I'm just going to be loading up and sharing my screen. So as Lucy mentioned, my name is Ross McMillan, And my role at the university is the executive director of student engagement. And so within that, there's a number of portfolios that's including residence life, the Center for Aboriginal Student Services, as well as student community leadership development. And my experience and exposure to Residential Regulation 4 has been both my life as a student and an active student, but also working with it to enhancing the student experience in the university. So what I'll be doing today is giving you a bit of a background of Presidential Regulation 4. I understand that many of you may not have to work with it on a regular basis, such as myself and Jer have to, but I do want to provide then a bit of a review of the existing regulation, which through that review, we'll see some of the reasons why we need to revise the regulation, and then a bit about the extensive consultation framework that we've been undertaking and will be undertaking. So to begin with, I just wanted to provide some background. So York University was established in 1959 through a York Act, which was subsequently revised in 1965. And this is the legislation that the university as we know it is constituted. And if you read the act, one of the purposes of the act is basically to outline the roles and responsibilities in the university. So that's everything from explaining what the mandate of the university is, to what the powers of the Board of Governors are, or in the Senate. And then it also identifies the role of the president. And the president is the vice chancellor and chief executive officer of the university. And that role has several responsibilities and powers. And one of those is 13.2C. That is the power to formulate and implement regulations governing the conduct of students and student activities. So that power has since evolved into a document called Presidential Regulation 4. When that is the regulation governing student organizations and the principles for their activities and finances. And it's a bit of a historical document for the university. It was actually developed in 1988 to formally recognize and establish the framework of student organizations at York University. And now, and then the existing regulation has been in effect since 1989. And so the regulation, once again, is designed to establish the relationship, privileges, requirements of the organizations. So it appears unfinished, and several sections are viewed as draft. And you'll see that in the actual regulation. It also sets out the ability for associate membership agreements, so the recognition of student governments and their constitutional requirements, and includes the process for campus referenda and establishment of levies versus appendix. And it's important to note for the scope of this review, we're not discussing the actual guidelines regarding referenda. So the President 4, and I have the link up there if you want to take a look at the actual document alongside this presentation, feel free to do so, or you can always just Google Presidential Regulation 4 York University. It's broken into really 4 sections with an appendix. And so on the next couple of slides, I'm going to go through and highlight each of these sections so you can understand what they mean and how we are making meaning of it. So the first section is governing principles for the reform of student governments and organizations and their activities and financial affairs. So this is very much kind of the principles side of Presidential Regulation 4. It identifies in clear terms the importance of student organizations and governments in the learning and growth of those involved, but also the positive role in the quality and diversity of life at York. And this is something that myself and my colleagues in the division students, this is why we get up and do the work we do, is to really support student life and student engagement within the university. It also identifies that activities must be conducted on a democratic, orderly, and responsible basis. And as you'll see through our consultation, that's something we're trying to really unpack, is what do those terms mean, both for students and student organizations. It also aligns the university's role in collecting the levy. And also, and this is kind of interesting because it really gets to the history of York, it identifies that student governments operate on 3 levels. So it identifies there's the central level, there's the local, the faculty level, and then the local. And at York, the context is the college system that we have on the Keele campus. And also identifies the important role of central student governments. Back in the time, if you read past issues of Excalibur to understand the history of this, you actually had different colleges and different faculties opting in and out of the central student government on a yearly basis. And so there wasn't really a concentrated central student government for the university to go to. It also identifies that while the university would have liked to have one central student government, it does recognize the importance of graduate students. And so at that point, it establishes 2 central student governments, one for undergrads, which we know as YFS, York Federation of Students, one for graduate students, which is the York University Graduate Student Association. And also recognizes students' ability to form voluntary organizations, which we know as clubs. Part B is student governments and organizations and their activities and finances. And so this is where you start seeing some of the language disconnect. So define student government framework and formally recognize these groups, including the role of a body called the Student Relations Committee. So Student Relations Committee is mentioned several times throughout the document, and that was a committee of the Board of Governors, which has since has not existed for at least 2 decades at this point. And they had certain powers that were prescribed to the Student Relations Committee, which have then gone on to other committees of the board. It also then very clearly states that every student must be represented by and pay a fee to essential student government. So this refers once again to the history of opting in and out, but also to the sense that at York, you need to be a member of essential student government, but it also permits associate membership agreements. So knowing the history of York and the unique nature of some of the other constituency groups, for example, Glendon, a separate campus, that they themselves are seen to have status and representation on that campus, but that the members of Glendon also have to pay a fee via GCSU, Glendon College Student Union, to the YFS. It also identifies the students may transfer or terminate college affiliation. So many of you are probably not aware of this, but York, we assign you to a college affiliation at the undergraduate level, and it's compulsory in your first year. Students do have the opportunity, if they wish to transfer. So if they wish to transfer and connect to their college community, but also they could not become a member of a college if they so wish to do so. And then it also has a very outdated section on student activities funds and outdated language on financing. And part of this is getting back to thinking of the era of the very late 80s and early 90s around how activities were funded at the institution to support student life. And so once again, that is not in keeping with how the university currently conducts its practices. And so that language is also, you'll notice some like temporary adjustments, talking about trust funds, talking about some transitionary funding as well. Section C. This is really the section of the referenda that talks about the referenda process, how levies are established, the responsibilities of student groups, and the financial responsibilities that they have regarding student levies, which is critical and really speaks to the work that we do with levy groups to receive their audits and then the process, the levy that the university receives in trust to transfer to student organizations. So basically, this is where the guidelines you would see for referenda. This is where they're linked to in the document. And more importantly to us, establishes the process if a levy student organization ceases to be viable. But it doesn't define viable. And so sometimes that's been challenging for us to understand what does it mean for an organization to not be viable anymore versus what does it mean to be viable? And then what do we do with the levy that's collected? Part D is, once again, you see that word draft. Draft statement concerning the activities and financial affairs of student governments and student organizations. So this is very much articulating the respective powers of the board and the president to enact these regulations concerning student governments and their organizations, including their activities and affairs. It really addresses, once again, the full force of compliance is a condition of the right to receive a levy or other funds. It's important to understand that the university, while recognizing student organizations, does not give up its power is identified in the York University Act. Organizations are really part of the university, not separate of. And then it also has an interesting interpretation of this in that it has requirements that are appended as constitutional guidelines in Appendix A. In Appendix A, once again, the constitutional guidelines, it has a list of different guidelines and some text provided. And so that's everything that if you're in a club or of a student government, you'll understand that when we look at your constitutions or discuss these matters with you, we're really looking to see if you have met the threshold, the standards that are set out in the guidelines. And once again, some of these are very telling of the era in which they're identified. And some of them are kind of standing true to today. So that, what's responsibility of the duties of the members, the powers of the organization, their objectives, speaks about conflict of interest, as well as election procedures, and then has advisory management boards. And part of this was back in the late 80s, early 90s, many of the college governments or college councils were running operations of pubs, campus pubs on campus. And so each one of those would have an advisory management board. So the rationale for this revision. So as I hope I have articulated, if you want to look at the regulation yourself, you'll see that the regulation is outdated, both in the language, you'll note draft is throughout it, and also it's outdated in how it relates to other policy structures at York. So we had in the history of York 5 presidential regulations. There's currently Pres Reg 4 and Presidential Regulation 5 remaining. Presidential 2 and 3 were changed to become the Code of Student Rights and Responsibilities. And so we need to kind of see how these documents work together. If you're interested, Presidential 5 is dealing with fraternities and sororities in the universities, not recognizing those entities. The other part for rationale for the revision is the language is an expectation is ambiguous. So once again, acting in a democratic, orderly, and responsible basis, the possibility of orderly democratic change must also be guaranteed. How is that interpreted? What does that mean? How can we expand that so we're all clear on that, as well as viable? So those are 2 phrases that stick out that we need to clarify for everyone. And then another thing that's come up, and this is something that we deal with both as Lucy's level, but also at my level, and Jared as well, is there's very limited options to address complaints or concerns or violations of the regulation. So essentially we have the ability to withhold levy if you do not follow the regulation and the requirement, or to have decertification. And this process is not clearly defined for all involved. So this is where we want to identify, what would the complaints process be? What is the role of the student organization itself to address complaints, first and foremost, and then what is the role of the university in that process? So the consultation framework. So I'm actually really proud of the work that we've been doing on this consultation. Once again, this is a regulation that really drives the work that we do in the Division of Students. And so I'm really happy to see the consultation, the extensive connection points we've had on this. So far, we have an online form for your community members, such as this one. We're doing a full list, an extensive consultation with different student organizations, which I'll get to next. We have a survey out. So currently there's a survey in your email box to undergraduate and graduate student population. So please do complete that. We're getting a good response rate so far. I'd like to always get more voices. There will be communication to the York community during updates. We have a website where you would have found this webinar. And then also we will have a draft revised regulation presented in the winter term for additional commentary and feedback. And I just want to highlight some of the groups you've already had consultations with. So it has been with the York Version of Students, the Graduate Student Association, many of the college councils, some of the faculty level student governments. We've also engaged groups such as the Interfaith Council. There's some kind of pan-university groups that come together, such as the College Council Presidents, the Student Representative Roundtable. We've also engaged non-student groups, such as the heads of the various colleges, who have a really important role in the relationship of college councils, and then a series of clubs. Just to highlight, we do have 2 other forums coming up. One is a clubs open forum, and then one will be a levied group open forum. So I think with that, I'll hand it back over to Lucy and we can begin questions.
Thank you, Ross. Now, I hope that this was really interesting to you. We've been through, I've had the pleasure of joining Ross and Jer on some of these consultations. And I can say they're active, they're engaged, they're very much with students who participate at these different levels. And we're getting great feedback. And we hope today, through some of your questions, we continue to get the feedback. So the first pre-submitted question was, how will this regulation affect my life as a student? So the first thing I do have to say is that we recognize that student organizations and clubs are vital to student engagement, not only to student participation, but student leadership. I think the skills that are developed through these leadership roles are invaluable throughout your lives well beyond the university. They also represent a student perspective and a student voice. And this student voice is shared with the university. We often meet with, consult, and listen to the student organizations. So this regulation, therefore, is all about why and how you would want to join those organizations. As well, it helps the organizations understand what we mean by transparency. It adds some definition to what should be in their constitution, what conflict resolution should look like, about being open and transparent and posting information in advance of meetings, minutes following meetings, about elections, etc. So why should you care? You should care because it will give you insight into many of these organizations, and it will give those of you who lead these organizations a clear understanding of the expectation and as well the relationship with the university. Ross or Jer, would you like to add anything?
The only thing I would add is sorry, is once again, so York is a large, one of the benefits we have of being a large, complex organization is once again, all the different student groups that come together. And so, so even if you're thinking that, not involved currently, there's opportunities for you to be involved throughout your student journey. So this is something that if you're looking, kind of just listening to and thinking, oh, that kind of piques my interest, there's many ways for you to be engaged to make more of your university experience.
Thank you, Ross. The next question. Many clubs and small organizations don't have large budgets, and they raise money on their own. I'm afraid the regulations are going to ask too much of us in these small groups. Will the regulations limit small clubs from existing? Jared, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. So first I should clarify that for levy organizations, so that's organizations that get an annual fee from the university from student fees, the regulation for them is if you receive a levy of $40,000 or more, you're required an audit. If your levy is less than $40,000, then a review engagement is needed. But if you're a student club, so that means you don't get an automatic levy, there's no such regulation on you. We ask you for things like a bank statement to understand that you do have a bank account, so we're making sure that you're financially responsible to your members, but that's about it. Our goal overall is to support organized student organizations, no matter if they're a 500 membership organization or a 15 person. And what we focus on is what kind of supports each organization needs, because you all have different goals. Some organizations ask us for help for getting back on their feet. They've been around for 10 years, but there's no historical memory about how the organization run, and it just interests students wanting to start it up again. That's great. We help you from that point on as if you're both a new club, but also renewing, because we know there's some traditions and some memory for the organization that they want to get back to. Or if you're a new organization, you have no idea how to go about it. Well, this is the reason why we have certain policies, documentation, and orientation sessions like Clubs 101 that teach you the day-to-day needs that a club will need to run, how to run an organization for a year. Now, time to time, clubs come, not time to time, excuse me, all the time, clubs come to us for support on a myriad of different issues. It could be that you have an internal conflict issue, you don't know how to deal with it. That's fine. We have a team of peers who are your staff to help you through this. And whether that's connecting you with resources through the Osgoode Mediation Clinic or looking at a different option if it's an inter-club issue, that's fine. Or if you need to know how to support your club's promotional strategies and how to communicate better, we advise you on the different avenues you can look into to promote your services and let the university community know that you exist. Or for example, you have an issue with your elections, right? It's like, how can we run this? There doesn't seem to be a lot of interest, which during the pandemic, that was a big issue for a lot of clubs, that you just didn't have the people to run the organization again. We work with you to understand what is it that you want to achieve and how can we go about it. And regardless of if your goals are lofty and you're looking to increase your membership by 50%, or looking to raise money for a charity over $10,000, or you just want to run a couple of events to bring people together, our purpose is to support you with your needs. And so that includes being clear with what the requirements are that you need to make these things happen, the resources you can access to help you with this thing, but also to let you know that we're here to support you because you're building student life on campus, and we want to support that no matter the size. So I hope I've answered that question.
Thanks, Jer. The next question, and again, as I'm going through some of these questions, I remind you that any of you who are participating, watching on Zoom, can certainly submit questions to us. So the next pre-submitted question was, how will this regulation affect the autonomy of student organization, especially groups like college councils or central unions? This question does come up throughout our consultations, and it's a very important question. Ross, would you like to respond to this?
Sure. So I'll take an initial go of it, and Jer, Lucy, if you have our comments. So as Lucy indicated, this is something that we've heard in our consultations. And it's interesting because I think it's important to understand and get a better understanding of what does autonomy mean to groups. So as identified in my presentation, the York Act sets out the powers of the president to regulate student conduct in the various activities. And so the existing regulation, a presidential regulation 4, has limits on autonomy. So for example, it sets out the standards that must exist in constitutions. It sets out the requirements or some of the guidelines around referenda and around financial levy distribution. So, as we've been talking to groups and digging a bit deeper, the concerns that I've heard mostly relate to concerns around interference in how student organizations operate in their day-to-day operations, as well as limiting speech. And so once again, the purpose of the regulation, getting to the principles, is really to set the principles and requirements of student organizations in order to be recognized. And I think Jer connected on this quite well in his answer. But there's over, on a typical year, this year's a bit different, but on a typical year, we have over 350 groups, and they operate quite well for the vast majority of the time. And it's clearly a strength for students and the lessons and skills and knowledge that they developed, but also a testament to what makes York a really great university. So our role is focused on the guidance and support as well as the educating programs for students to ensure that they're being effective stewards of the organization. That said, every year, our office and the Vice Provost of Students, Lucy, receives complaints. And so, for example, these complaints are a full range, everything from disagreements amongst the group, so intergroup conflict, regarding how things are sometimes just an interpersonal conflict, but sometimes it's more serious conflict within the group. We have groups that are in conflict with other organizations. We have groups that are not following the Constitution. So it may surprise you that some student organizations, they don't actually read their Constitution, and they're making decisions or taking actions that are not in keeping with their Constitution. We have groups that are also limiting access to other members on things that are core to making an organization function, such as minutes or notice of meetings or election processes. And then there's also we have complaints and incidences where there's financial impropriety. And this ranges from everything from allegations to theft or fraud to also then disagreements about how money is being spent. And this happens this has happened both at a student government level in the past. It's also happened at the clubs level. And so what we want to really do is have clear processes involved for everyone, for both the university and for students and for the student organizations, to really identify, when there are complaints, how should they be addressed? One part of this is how do students access the complaint process? And as we've done, as a nature, of course, is to always direct them initially to the student organization. So it's going to the student organization itself because they're the ones that are closest to the ground, understanding what the concern is. And then the other part is also, though, enabling the university to work with these student organizations to make sure that they're back in compliance with the regulation if they follow that compliance. So that kind of addresses the involvement on the day-to-day aspect. The other concern we've heard around autonomy is the concern that this is going to be used to stifle dissent or freedom of speech of student organizations. And so I speak for the other panel members, but I definitely think that we fully understand and appreciate the role of representation and advocacy when it comes to student organizations, especially student governments. This is part of the reason why we have a representative model. is that everyone is a member to your faculty level student government, or pays a levy and is a member of a central student government, or is a member of a college student government if they're affiliated with that college. So representation and advocacy is clearly in the mandate of those entities. And while we work together as much as possible to better the university, we understand that that's not always the case, that we will have disagreements, that you will have either disagreements with decisions of the university or the university administration, but you'll also have disagreements with other student organizations. And that is, I've been at York for a while now, and in my history, I've seen disagreements between different student organizations that they may have, right? And so what we want to do is ensure that, if you have your protest, your dissent, your opposition, that basically, as long as that's not expressed in violence or threats of violence, is a manner that's keeping with the statement of policy on freedom of speech and other applicable rules, such as your own objectives and bylaws, that speech and that dissent and those kind of disruptions and protests will be protected.
Ross, I can just jump in there. Just to add to this, is that in the current regulation, which will continue, there's a reason why it says that all organizations should have a democratic form of leadership change every year, right? It's because you are the students who are responsible to one another. And so your leaders are first accountable to you as members, and to understand that relationship. But if we were to come in because of complaints, it's not to overtake that relationship, it's to support it. So like Ross kind of mentioned, we work with the student, we're partners in student success. So whether there's a complaint from a student organization to another one, or just a student in general regarding the conduct of an individual, we don't just come in there and try to ask and start demanding things. We ask questions and we try to work with everybody involved to get the outcomes that people can be mutually agreeable.
Thank you both. I will add something, and Ross, you were going down the road about free speech, because again, we are asked about this during the consultation. So no policy or regulation stands alone. It stands within a framework of the many other policies that the university has. And I do want to draw your attention, if you haven't read it, you should take a read of York's policy on free speech. And it starts by stating that York has an unwavering commitment to fundamental values of free expression, free inquiry, and respect for genuine diversity of thought. We're also asked by some of the student organizations around the idea of protest. So I do also want to draw your attention, also within the definition of free speech, the university is very clear that we believe in respectful debate, including robust rights to protest and express dissent as central to the mission of the university. Some of our student organizations may take positions against a university direction or policy, and that they have the absolute right to do. This regulation does not in any way touch upon the freedom of any organization to peacefully represent their constituent groups and put those ideas forward. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question, which is when these revised regulations come out, so when we do finish all of your input and draft a revision, how will these changes affect student organizations, and will we have an opportunity to comment? So the simple answer is yes. There will be an opportunity to ask questions about the draft because we want the revisions to be clear in nature and work towards that. Ross, why don't I turn it over to you for a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, so I mean, part of this, once again, looking at the regulation from 1989 and updating it for today, we know that it'll take several rounds, and so that's why we're doing this consultation now. But we will also be doing, when we have the draft out, it'll be circulated, so you can also provide additional feedback. And then once it's adopted, there will also be an opportunity to engage and will help people understand what it means. So we have some things we already have in place for as a Clubs 101 sessions, for example, in which we kind of explain what does it mean for Presidential Regulation 4. I assume we'll have to be probably more in depth about that around the expectations. There'll also be a notice. So there'll be a notice period of when it comes into effect. So it's not just like it would be enacted and all of a sudden it's in effect. We'd be working with student organizations to ensure that they have time to bring their constitutions up to date, for example, or to work with us if they have any kind of need to clarify what the regulation means. And then another thing that you're starting to see, and it's a practice I imagine will be put in this as well, is you're seeing this in York policy and regulations going forward, is a cycle of renewal. So that we'll actually have a period, a planned period for us to come together to constantly be looking at these documents as our university evolves.
Great. There are some questions from all of you. So one of our students is asking, when are the consultation sessions for clubs and levy organization, and how can someone register? Ross or Jer?
Yeah, I can answer the one about clubs. So the clubs one, actually, there's one tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Happy to share the link within the chat for all of you to attend. But you don't just have to attend that. If you just want to have a consultation with us about this, we're happy to have that with you. And if you want to invite your club members as well, like you can be welcome to email me directly and to have that chat with us. I'm more than happy to engage in this. For the levy organizations as well, let me check my calendar, excuse me one second.
I believe there's one on Monday. But once again, those are kind of open sessions. If you actually, if you have direct feedback you want to provide to us, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Lucy or Jer or Jeff Collins, who's been assisting us in this.
So there's one on Tuesday as well. So yeah, once again, you don't have to, it's open if you want to come to a main one or you want an individual one, happy to meet with you.
Thank you both. Another question from the students who are in our audience is, how are the consultations being used to create the updated draft regulations? I think we touched on that, but Ross, perhaps, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, maybe I'll just add to it is this is why we're consulting and this is why we're doing a survey, is because there's obviously a lens that comes from something like, I really like policy and regulations, so that's one of my things I'm into, but having the lens of actual students who are using this day to day to help us understand, what's working and what's not working is very helpful. So the idea that we're taking this consultation in, we're incorporating it into a draft, and then giving that back out to you to provide additional feedback on. So we are listening. The survey results that we're getting are being will be very helpful and informative. And so please continue to provide your feedback.
Thanks, Ross. Jer, this next question, I think, has your name written all over it. So the question is, the process of starting a club can be very confusing at York because there's clubs that register with SCLD and clubs that are registered with our student governments, etc. So the question is it possible to create one process to start a student club?
So I should first mention that I'm very grateful for the relations we have with the different bodies at York to register clubs, whether that's the York Federation of Students, the Glendon College Student Union, if the faculty does it, or Athletics and Recreation. And I appreciate the fact that every body, every separate body, because it has different requirements or needs for the recognition. And I'm happy to announce that we work together very well. Like, we have open communications, we ensure we're aligned on the same pieces. And I'm open absolutely to have the conversation with them in the future to maybe make this the one process as well. But I do want to respect the fact that these organizations, kind of, we talked about earlier, they have their own kind of needs that they need to meet and stuff like that. So I'm always open to it, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. Always open to it, and I can appreciate how it can be a little bit challenging and confusing for student clubs. So we do our best to communicate with about each other's services and how to go registering them, and if there's any ways to improve that, always happy to listen.
Just to add on, maybe one thing that will benefit us is we are going to be going through a process to look at UConnect. So UConnect, as many of you know, is really our student engagement platform and what we use to recognize clubs. And so I think as we go through that, to look at what is the next version of that, doing that in partnership, specifically with YFS and GCSU and their faculty and athletics partners, could help us maybe streamline that process for everyone involved.
Thank you both. So the next question is, will this revision ensure that complaints about clubs or governments are being dealt with? So as Ross has said, throughout the year, I get a variety of complaints coming to me. So they may go to Ross, they may go to Jer. Let me back this up a little by saying, first and foremost, I think our student organizations do a phenomenal job. They are so engaged and provide so many opportunities for students to build community. And as well, they offer so many different services to support the students that they represent. But there are times that students bring complaints to various members of the university. So as we've already said during this Zoom presentation, when a complaint is brought to the university, we do not rush over to the organization and start making demands. It always begins with referring the students back to the constituent group who represent them to engage in a conflict resolution process. So with Presidential Regulation 4, one of our primary issues is to make sure that there is a robust conflict resolution process that allows the students to engage. If the students are dissatisfied, feel they were not heard, or other issues arise, and they do want the university to intervene in some way, then it always does begin with a conversation. Our first conversation is with the student organization to talk to them about the process, how they dealt with the complaint, did they follow their own bylaws or constitutions, and it is a continuous cycle of conversations, because the best outcome is that there's robust processes that address any concerns that any student that belongs to that organization has. The university has in the past and can also bring additional resources. So for example, in the past, we have introduced conflict resolution or mediation. In a couple of cases, the university hired external third-party mediators to work with groups, to work through their difference in a way that they could then both continue to operate and represent the views of their constituent groups without this very high level of conflict. So that's really what this regulation is addressing: sound processes, an outline of the relationship with the university, and it does one other thing, and Ross did mention that in Presidential Regulation 4, the university has the authority to withhold funds or to decertify. That is an extreme. Withholding funds and decertifying is always a worst case scenario, last process. So there's got to be opportunities and steps along the way that are outlined and that are clear, so that the organization at whatever level and the university know all the steps to follow. So hopefully we don't end up in that worst case scenario. Ross or Jer, anything you'd like to add?
The only other maybe thing to add is just, there's principles in this area of administrative law and regulation just around natural justice. And so that's something that will be important also to be mindful of for everyone involved.
Thank you. There's still some time for a couple more questions. So one of our students listening today in our audience asks, what supports or training does the university provide to leaders of student organizations? Jared, do you want to take that one?
Oh yeah, I could take that. In fact, we would love it if you would come to all the training we offer you, because there's just so much, not just from our office, but from various departments. Please take advantage of these engaged opportunities. But to answer your question, like SCLD alone, we work with a number of different student bodies, including the College Presidents Association, the York Orientation Directors Association that organizes orientation every week, the Finance Committee with all the VP finances from Levy organizations, the Charity Committee, which is a collection of all the charitable and advocacy organizations, the Interfaith Council, a collection of all the faith-based organizations. We have a leadership department dedicated to providing leadership workshops, not only to student organization leaders, but to regular student leaders. We work with learning skills who have their passport to success, the different faculties who have support programs, Center for Human Rights Equity. I'm talking really fast, I'm sorry. But basically what I'm trying to tell you is, if you want training and support, please, we will happily make that happen for you, because there's so much rich and diverse trainings available on campus. We want to connect them to you. So yes, there is quite a lot, and we're happy to have you attend them.
Jared, maybe, or Ross, you might want to mention the mandatory training that happens at the beginning of every year.
Sure, I can do this as well. So all student organizations registered with the university have to attend what's called the Clubs 101 orientation session. And this is a walkthrough of what your year as a club will entail, for everything from when you get registered, to recruiting membership, to promoting yourselves, to running events, even how to end the year off. Because one thing that we've noticed from year to year, and as fellow club leaders, you can let us know if this is true or not, that there seems to be some challenges when it comes to transition. And we can understand why. You know, when your club is run for the entire year and then it comes to exam time, you kind of put on elections and then you're like, okay, need to focus on my studies now. And what we see is that's a challenge for next year's executives coming in. It's like, we had no idea what to do. And instead of registering at the beginning of the registration period, it comes towards the ends when it's like, we need to run events, but we're not registering, stuff like that. So we do have these sessions that go throughout the entire registration process, really throughout the year, as well as online resources. So we try to do our best to make sure you know exactly what you need to do for the year and where to go if you need support.
Maybe just to add on there, I mean, the other thing that's really important to us is to hear from you. Is like what kind of tools or resources you need, right? So we have modified, you know, how we do different kind of processes ourselves. Tabling is a great example, how we changed tabling up to make it easier for students to access during different times when we're back on campus. But also, there's other resources or templates that you need. Please let Jared, myself, and the team know, so we can, because if you're asking, you know, it's probably something that's needed for other groups too.
And it's not just training. So this year, I'm happy to announce our student engagement and clubs team, they've put on these things called club showcases, where, you know, we appreciate in the pandemic, organizations having a tougher time engaging with students and getting them onto their events. So we run these initiatives called club showcases every 2 weeks, where clubs will come and promote their initiative, their event, whatever they're doing. This week, we had the club Forza Drive do a car show that was really well attended, and it was quite exciting to see for anybody who's interested in cars. So if you're looking for ways to outreach to students and to get interest in what you're doing, please come chat with us. We'd love to help.
I think I hit a nerve with both of you. They were very excited to share all the opportunities. Another question, and to some degree we've touched on it, but you did ask. So the question is, how can students be assured these regulations won't lead to levies being withheld if they speak out or are in dispute with York administration? It's a good question, because this is very much the reason that we have the regulation, and that it needs to be very clear. The regulation has nothing to do with students speaking out. We expect student advocacy. We expect that student organizations at various levels represent the voices and ideas of their student group. And sometimes that will be in conflict. A well-written regulation will actually outline quite specifically when and under what circumstances finance may be withheld. So, for example, currently, even though it's 30 some years out of date, that opportunity exists within current presidential regulation 4. But this is always a last resort. So the regulation will define when, if, under what circumstances, and it will ensure that there are a number of steps, opportunities to provide the organization with the information as to what, for example, they might be out of step with, what the expectations, timelines that allow them to address it, and very many stages before it gets to anything at that type of stage of withholding fees. We do consider that a last step in a very long process of conversations that allow the organizations to amend any ways that they are sort of out of step with policies or procedures, particularly financial. Ross or Jer?
And once again, this is something that we will do a better job with, as well as making transparent, especially on the financial side of it. So we currently have a framework around levy dispersals. And some of you that are involved in the levy process that may be attending this are aware of that. So we have a process in which we disperse levies. And then if, for example, we're not receiving the required audits or financial statements, which we have to report up to the Board of Governors, then there is a process we have to address those concerns to also get the groups back on their footing so they can continue to support students and the students they represent or the students' services that they provide. So some of those things already exist. And part of this is to make that also, once again, make that more available and make that more understood for all involved.
Terrific, thank you. And I remind you, we have just a few minutes left, so if there are any last questions that anybody would like to add, please do so. In the meanwhile, I just would like to review the timeline so everyone is aware of what's happening in terms of, so I'm going to call on you, Ross, in terms of the consultation, how long that survey is out for, and approximately when we will have a draft, and then how long you anticipate the draft might be out, and where students will be notified that the draft is available for comment.
Sure. So we still have a number of consultations to do. So we are continuing to do your individual group consultations, but once again, if any of the attendees here want to connect with us, happy to do so. And the survey is closing next Friday. So it was launched earlier this week. There'll be a couple of reminder emails, and then the survey will close. And then we have, as Jared mentioned, the 2 forums that are also taking place. We anticipate that we'll then have a draft. I say the winter term because we will be taking a break and then coming back in the winter term. But I do anticipate that'll be early in the winter term. And then with that, we will be able to then provide that out for additional consultation and feedback for folks. This will not be you have a week, give us the response. I assume it'll be up to a month. We'll want to make sure that there's an opportunity to engage as we need to engage with people. And then flowing from that, there will also be ask how people be notified. So we do have a website on the Vice Provost's office students website, so you can go to that. We'll also be putting this out in This Week at York. So that's the weekly email that everyone sees. We'll also email the people on our listserv as well. So we have a clubs listserv, and we have a listserv for student governments, as well as there'll be a notification on Wi-Fi. So many different ways that we'll try to communicate this out to make sure that you're kept apprised.
Thank you, Ross. And one last question, and that is, what type of restorative supports do you have for clubs or governments when they cease to exist or fail to follow policy? Ross or Jared, would you like to take that?
Jared, do you want to handle the clubs piece?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we require from Clubs Register is to understand what the club will do if it was to fold. And sometimes clubs have assets they will own or money in their account that we make them articulate what the process will be if they were untimely not to renew themselves. And for the most part, most organizations agree they'll donate the money to a charity of their voting. In terms of when organizations shut down, we kind of have some procedures, make sure your membership is aware. And the most common reason club shut down is a lack of interest from the membership to take over the executive. So we just ensure if that is the case, then they've done some kind of messaging to the organization, thank everyone for contributions, tried to notify as the founder of the organization, if possible, that the club is now shutting down. Sometimes not always possible, but just to ensure that you've kind of crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. So if you have an office, you notify the department that's giving you the office about that, you close your bank account down, you've shut down your email, your social media accounts have been deactivated, and so forth and so forth. For student governments, Ross, I'll pass this one on to you.
Sure, and maybe and I'll get to some of the other aspects of it as well. So typically when groups don't follow university policy, it's usually from I'd say a place of innocent ignorance. They're not aware of the various university policies that may be involved. And so that's educational, right? So that's talking to the group, having them understand what the university policy is, what the possible infraction is, and how to do a restorative process to become back in line. One of the things I did raise is one of the challenges on the cease to exist is the viable. So when student levy groups cease to be viable, how are we defining that term, and what is the process we want to use to then address those situations, which have come up in the past as well. So really, once again, it's talking to the groups. I mean, we're all part of this York community together. It's how do we work together to understand the policies that also apply to us as staff and apply to student organizations.
So with that, I'm going to thank everyone. Some of you may have 3 o'clock classes, so I don't want you to be late. Thank you all who participate. Of course, thank you, Jer and Ross. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Thank you to our Glendon College Masters of Conference Interpretation Program students. Thank you to the team at LTS who this couldn't be possible, and to all the people behind the scenes. I remind everybody that this is being recorded, and if you want to share it with others, it will be available at the Vice Provost student website, which is go.yorku.ca/PR4/-review, or Google it. That's usually the easiest way to find it. I wish you great success with the rest of your term. I wish you good health. I remind you there are tremendous support services available in learning skills, in leadership skills through York International, in counseling, and through your student governments, YFS, the Graduate Student Association, and your college and faculty organizations. They're there to provide support, they're there to provide community, and I'm forever grateful to all the tremendous work that they do on behalf of you, the students, and in partnership with the university. So thank you so much. Be well.